Ma'am, turn around. Put your hands behind your back.
For what? What exactly am I being arrested for?
You're resisting an investigation. Don't make this harder than it needs to be.
Investigation? I'm standing in front of my own house.
I said turn around, now.
Do you have a warrant or probable cause?
I don't need a warrant to detain you.
I
You
am
just
not
made a serious
resisting.
mistake. Oh yeah? What mistake is that?
I'm a federal agent.
A black woman. Her own neighborhood. Her own street. 40 feet from her own front door. And a police officer who decided none of that mattered. What you are about to watch is the story of what happens when a racist cop stops the wrong woman. Not wrong because she was innocent, though she was. Wrong because she had spent 11 years of her career doing one specific thing: investigating police officers exactly like him, building federal cases against departments exactly like his, and winning. Officer Blake Turner did not know any of that when he stepped out of his cruiser and ordered Stephanie Cole to the ground in front of her own home. He saw a black woman in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and he made a decision. A decision he had made before, 3 times before to be exact, and walked away from without consequence every single time. This time was different. This time the woman he stopped was a senior federal agent with the Department of Homeland Security. This time, 3 of her neighbors had doorbell cameras pointed directly at the street. And this time the woman sitting in handcuffs on that curb was not trying to figure out how to survive the moment. She was already figuring out how to make sure it never happened to anyone else again. By the time this story is over, Turner will have lost his badge, his certification, and any future in law enforcement. His supervisor will have been demoted. His department will be under federal investigation. And the woman he put on the ground in front of her own home will be standing on courthouse steps having changed the law in 3 states. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let us start at the beginning, on a cold Wednesday morning, on a quiet residential street, with a woman walking to her front door. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments right now. We love seeing where our community tunes in from all around the world. And if you believe a black woman should be able to walk to her own front door without being put in handcuffs, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video right now. Because Stephanie Cole did not just fight for herself. She fought for every person who faced the same thing and did not have a federal badge in their pocket when it happened. The least we can do is make sure the world hears her name. Now, let us talk about what really happened on that street. Stephanie Cole had made that walk hundreds of times. From the driveway to the front door, past the small garden she kept meaning to replant, up the 3 steps to the porch, key in the lock. 40 feet, maybe 45 on the days she checked the mailbox on the way. It was the kind of walk a person stops thinking about after the first few months in a house. Automatic. Familiar. Safe in the specific way that home is supposed to feel safe. She had bought the house in Elmwood Hills 4 years earlier, partly because of the neighborhood, and partly because of the commute. 31 minutes to the federal building downtown on a good morning, 38 on a bad one. She had measured it twice before she signed the papers. That was the kind of person Stephanie Cole was. She measured things twice. She read the fine print. She did not make decisions she had not thought all the way through. 11 years with the Department of Homeland Security had made her that way, or maybe she had always been that way, and that was why she had lasted 11 years. She had started as a junior investigator fresh out of law school, sharp and hungry and slightly terrifying to the senior agents, who underestimated her in the first 6 months and did not make that mistake twice. She had worked her way to senior field agent through a combination of precision, patience, and the particular kind of stubbornness that looks like professionalism from the outside. Her specialty was civil rights violations committed under color of law, which is a formal way of saying she investigated people who used a badge as a weapon. She was good at it. She was very good at it. That Wednesday morning, she had been at the federal building since 6:30 for a briefing on an active investigation she could not discuss. She had driven home in the same navy blazer she had worn to the office, olive green shirt underneath, gold chain at her collar, the kind of put together that does not require effort anymore after enough years of early mornings. She pulled into her driveway, cut the engine, and picked up her phone to check one last message before going inside. She was 40 feet from her front door. The neighborhood was quiet. A dog was barking somewhere 2 streets over. The sky was the pale, flat gray of a morning that had not decided yet whether it was going to be a good day. She got out of the car. She did not see the cruiser until she heard the door open behind her, and in 90 seconds, everything changed. The call had come in at 7:31 that morning. A resident on the north side of Elmwood Hills reported a possible break-in at a property 2 streets over from Stephanie's house. The reporting party had not witnessed an actual entry. They had not seen anyone climb through a window or force a door. What they had seen, according to the dispatch log, was a person they did not recognize walking slowly near the property. The description they gave to the dispatcher was 4 words long. Black, female, dark clothing, suspicious. That was it. That was the entire basis. No height, no age range, no specific behavior beyond the word suspicious. which is not a behavior. It is a feeling. And it is a feeling, as 11 years of federal civil rights work had taught Stephanie Cole, that tends to follow certain people into certain neighborhoods regardless of whether those people belong there, own property there, pay taxes there, or have lived there for 4 years, and know the name of every neighbor on their block. Turner had received the dispatch, driven into the subdivision, and spent 22 minutes driving slowly through the residential streets. He would later state in his report that he observed a subject matching the description, acting in a manner consistent with surveillance of residential properties. What the doorbell camera footage would show was Stephanie Cole getting out of her own car in her own driveway and walking toward her own front door. Turner's report would describe her body language as evasive. The footage would show a woman checking her phone. His report would describe her as appearing startled when approached. The footage would show a woman who turned around when she heard a car door open behind her, which is what any person does when they hear a car door open behind them. This is the machinery of a bad stop. It does not require hatred in the loud, obvious form. It requires something quieter, and in many ways more dangerous. It requires a set of assumptions, so deeply embedded that the person carrying them does not experience them as assumptions at all. They experience them as instinct, as reading a situation, as doing the job. Turner had 3 prior complaints in his file that followed the same architecture. A vague call, a black resident, a report written afterward that described the encounter in language carefully chosen to make the unreasonable sound procedural. 3 times Sergeant Kowalski had read those reports. 3 times he had signed off on them. And so on a cold Wednesday morning, Blake Turner stepped out of his cruiser absolutely certain that what he was doing was right. That certainty was about to cost him everything. She turned around slowly, deliberately, with her hands already visible. That was the first thing the doorbell camera on her neighbor Linda Marsh's house captured. Stephanie Cole, hands open at her sides, turning to face the officer approaching her from the direction of the cruiser. Not running, not reaching, not doing anything that a reasonable person watching the footage would describe as threatening. Turning around, the way anyone turns around when they hear footsteps behind them on their own street. Turner told her to stop. She had not been moving. She told him she lived there. He told her she matched a description. She asked him which property had been burglarized. He told her that was not her concern and ordered her to the ground. This is the moment Stephanie Cole made a decision that 11 years of training had prepared her for, without her ever knowing it would be necessary on her own driveway. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She reached slowly into the inside pocket of her navy blazer with 2 fingers and said clearly, and loudly enough for every camera in range to capture it, "I am a federal agent with the Department of Homeland Security. I am reaching for my credentials. I am not resisting. Do not touch me." She produced her badge and her DHS identification card and held them out toward Turner at arm's length. He looked at them. He looked at her. And then he told her to put them on the ground and get down on her knees. The second doorbell camera, mounted on the garage of her neighbor across the street, captured what happened next. Turner moved toward her. Stephanie repeated her identification clearly one more time. Turner took her right arm, turned her toward his cruiser, and placed her in handcuffs. Her DHS badge was still in her hand when the cuffs went on. 3 cameras, 3 angles, 1 body cam, all of them running. The footage would later show Turner glancing at the credentials for no more than 2 seconds before making his decision. 2 seconds to look at a federal badge and decide it did not matter. A curtain moved in the house next door. Then a front door opened 2 properties down. Then another. Neighbors appearing in doorways the way people do when something is wrong in a place where wrong things are not supposed to happen. Uncertain whether to intervene. Reaching for their phones because it was the only tool available to them that felt like it might actually help. Stephanie sat on the curb in handcuffs in front of her own home. She did not cry. She did not plead. She looked straight ahead, and she started remembering every detail, the way she had been trained to do, the way she had taught others to do, because she already knew that what happened in the next few minutes would matter far less than what she could prove happened in the last few. Kowalski pulled up 8 minutes later. He came around the corner in a supervisory vehicle. No lights, no urgency. The unhurried pace of a senior officer responding to what the radio had described as a routine detainment in a residential area. He had been a sergeant with the Elmwood Hills Police Department for 14 years. He had seen routine detainments. He knew what they looked like. He was not expecting anything that would require him to think very hard before his second cup of coffee. He parked behind Turner's cruiser and got out. What he saw stopped him at the door of his vehicle for a moment, that the third doorbell camera, mounted on the corner property at the end of Stephanie's block, captured in its entirety. A professionally dressed black woman sitting on the curb in handcuffs. A federal badge and identification card on the ground beside her where Turner had placed them. 3 neighbors visible in doorways. at least 2 phones up and recording. And Turner standing beside his cruiser with the particular posture of a man waiting to be told he had done the right thing. Kowalski walked toward Stephanie first. He looked at the badge on the ground. He picked it up. He read it. He read it again. Then he looked at Turner. Turner began explaining the dispatch call, the description, the evasive behavior, the subject refusing to comply. He used the same language he always used in these moments, the language that had worked 3 times before. The procedural vocabulary that turned a bad decision into a documented justification. He said it with the confidence of a man whose supervisor had never once pushed back. Kowalski was not pushing back now either. But something in his expression had shifted, in the way expressions shift. When a person is running rapid calculations, they do not want to be running. This was not a civilian with a complaint that could be reviewed in a quiet office and closed with a signature. This was a senior Department of Homeland Security agent sitting in handcuffs on a public street with 3 cameras on her and a federal badge in his hand. What Kowalski understood, standing on that curb, was not that Turner had done something wrong. He had known Turner had done things wrong. He had known it 3 times before and chosen paperwork over accountability every single time. What he understood now was that the paperwork was not going to hold. He told Turner to remove the handcuffs. Turner hesitated for just a second, the hesitation of a man who had never been told to undo what he had done, and then complied. Stephanie stood up. She straightened her blazer. She picked up her credentials from Kowalski's hand without a word, and then she took out her phone. She made the call from the sidewalk, not from inside her house, not from the privacy of her car, not from anywhere that would have taken her off camera or out of earshot. She stood exactly where she had been standing when the handcuffs came off, on the curb in front of her own home, and she dialed. Deliberately, in full view of Turner, Kowalski, and every neighbor still watching from their doorways. That was not an accident. Stephanie Cole did not do things by accident. Her supervisor, Deputy Director Frank Okafor, picked up on the 3rd ring. He was a measured man by nature, the kind of senior official who absorbed information before reacting to it, which was one of the reasons Stephanie had always respected him. She had worked under 3 supervisors in 11 years. Okafor was the only one she had never needed to translate herself for. She told him what had happened in the same order it had occurred. No editorializing. No emotion that she could not afford to spend on a sidewalk in front of 2 officers who were already watching her carefully. She gave him the location, the officer's name from the badge she had read before the handcuffs went on, the supervisor's name, the time of the stop, the time of the detention, and the time the handcuffs were removed. She told him about the 4 cameras. She told him about the credentials on the ground. She told him about the 2 seconds Turner had spent looking at her federal badge before deciding it did not apply to him. Okafor was quiet for a moment after she finished. Then he asked her one question. He asked if she was physically hurt. She said she was not. He said good. Then he told her to go inside her house, do not move her car, do not touch anything in the driveway, and do not speak to either officer again without federal counsel present. He told her that someone from the department's legal office would be calling her within the hour. He told her that he was personally notifying the Inspector General's office before he hung up the phone. Then he said her name, just her name, the way people say a name when they want the other person to hear that they are not alone in what they are carrying. She said she understood. She ended the call. She looked at Turner one last time. He was standing beside his cruiser with the expression of a man who had just begun to understand that the ground beneath him was no longer solid and had not been for quite some time. She walked up her porch steps, put the key in the lock, and went inside. The 4 cameras kept recording. The attorney's name was Diana Reeves. Not a civil rights lawyer by accident or idealism, but by architecture. She had built her entire practice around one specific category of case: misconduct committed by people who believed the institution would absorb it. She had been recommended to Stephanie by 3 different colleagues at DHS within 48 hours of the incident, each of them independently, none of them knowing the others had made the same call. That kind of unanimous recommendation meant something. Stephanie hired her on a Thursday morning, and by Friday afternoon, Diana Reeves had begun pulling on every thread available. She filed for Turner's body camera footage first. Unedited, time-stamped, complete, from the moment he stepped out of his cruiser to the moment Kowalski told him to remove the handcuffs. She filed for the dispatch recording from the original burglary call, the full transcript, and the name of the reporting party. She filed a preservation notice to all 3 neighbors whose doorbell cameras had captured the encounter, ensuring the footage could not be deleted, overwritten, or lost to a routine system reset. Then she filed for Turner's complete personnel file. Every evaluation, every commendation, every complaint, and every supervisory review going back to his first day with the Elmwood Hills Police Department. What came back changed the shape of the case entirely. The 3 prior complaints were worse on paper than Stephanie had been told. The first had been filed by a 58-year-old black man who had been stopped while shoveling snow in his own driveway. The second by a black woman in her early 30s who had been detained outside a grocery store 2 blocks from her apartment while carrying her own bags. The third by a black teenager who had been ordered off his bicycle on a public trail and questioned for 20 minutes without cause. Each report had been written by Turner in the same careful, procedural language. Each one described the subject using words like agitated, uncooperative, and evasive. Each one had been reviewed and signed by Sergeant Ray Kowalski. Each one had been closed without a single disciplinary note, without a conversation on record, without anything that indicated the department had treated the complaint as a problem requiring a solution. Diana Reeves laid all 4 files on her desk in chronological order and looked at them the way a person looks at something that has been hiding in plain sight. This was not a pattern that had developed quietly or accidentally. This was a pattern that had been reviewed, approved, and returned to service 4 times. The complaints were not buried. They were signed. There were names on every closure decision and dates beside every signature. That was not a gap in the system. That was the system, and now it was a paper trail, with a federal attorney holding one end of it. Diana Reeves did not save it for closing arguments. She introduced the footage on the second day of trial, in the middle of direct examination, without announcement or theatrical buildup. She simply asked the court's permission to play 2 recordings simultaneously, side by side on the same screen, and the judge granted it. Turner's legal team did not object. They had seen the footage. They had made the calculation that objecting would draw more attention to what was coming than letting it play. That calculation was wrong. The left side of the screen showed Turner's bodycam footage, raw and unedited, from the moment he stepped out of his cruiser to the moment Kowalski removed the handcuffs. The right side of the screen showed Turner's written incident report, the official documented account he had submitted to the department within 2 hours of the encounter, displayed in plain text large enough for every person in the courtroom to read without strain. Diana Reeves let both run without commentary. The bodycam showed Stephanie with her hands visible at her sides. The report described the subject as moving in an evasive manner upon approach. The bodycam showed Stephanie standing still on her own driveway. The report described the subject as attempting to flee the scene. The bodycam showed Stephanie producing her federal credentials with 2 fingers, slowly, while verbally identifying herself. The report described the subject as reaching aggressively into her clothing in a manner that caused the officer to fear for his safety. The bodycam showed Turner looking directly at the DHS badge for 2 full seconds. The report made no mention of credentials being presented at any point during the encounter. The courtroom was very quiet, not the performed quiet of people being polite, but the specific silence that settles over a room when everyone in it has just seen the same thing and is privately deciding what to do with it. 2 jurors in the front row had stopped taking notes. The juror in seat 7, a middle-aged woman who had been largely unreadable through the first day and a half of proceedings, was looking at the screen with an expression that had moved past surprise into something slower and more permanent. Turner sat at the defense table in the same suit he had worn every day of the trial. He was looking at the table in front of him. Not at the screen, not at the jury. At the table, the way a person looks at a fixed point when every other surface in the room has become unbearable. Diana Reeves let the footage run all the way to the end. Then she turned to the jury. She said, "The report and the recording cover the same 4 minutes and 37 seconds. You have now seen both." She paused. "I have no further questions at this time." The verdict came back in 3 hours, not 3 days. Not after a weekend recess or a note from the jury asking to review additional evidence. 3 hours after Diana Reeves rested her case, the jury returned, and the foreperson read the finding in the flat, careful tone of someone who understood the weight of what they were delivering and had decided the most respectful thing they could do was deliver it clearly. The department's legal team had offered a settlement twice during the trial. Twice Stephanie had declined. She had not come to federal court for a number that could be paid quietly and filed away. She had come for the record. She had come for the part that could not be sealed, expunged, or absorbed into an institutional footnote that nobody would ever read. She got it. Blake Turner was terminated from the Elmwood Hills Police Department within 72 hours of the verdict. His law enforcement certification, the credential that allowed him to work as a police officer in any capacity in the state, was revoked by the state certification board 10 days later. The board's written decision noted a pattern of conduct inconsistent with the obligations of sworn law enforcement and cited all 4 incidents by name, including the 3 that Sergeant Kowalski had closed without action. Kowalski did not escape the verdict either. An internal affairs review, opened during the trial and completed 6 weeks after it ended, found that his repeated closure of complaints against Turner without disciplinary review constituted a failure of supervisory duty. He was demoted from sergeant to patrol officer, stripped of his supervisory authority, and placed on a 12-month performance review. 2 months into that review, he resigned. The Department of Justice opened a formal investigation into the Elmwood Hills Police Department's stop and detention practices 30 days after the verdict. The investigation would eventually review more than 400 stops conducted by the department over a 5-year period. The findings, released 8 months later, described a systemic pattern of racially disproportionate stops in residential areas and recommended a series of mandatory reforms as a condition of continued federal funding. And the court, in addition to the civil judgment, ordered the establishment of an independent civilian oversight board with full subpoena power, the authority to compel documents, testimony, and records from the department without the department's cooperation or consent. It was the subpoena power that mattered most. Every prior oversight structure the city had attempted had been advisory, recommendations without teeth, reports that the department could read, acknowledge, and ignore. This one could not be ignored. This one had been built, piece by piece, out of the 4 minutes and 37 seconds that Blake Turner had spent certain the system would protect him. It would not. It never had been going to. The settlement was $3.2 million. Stephanie did not mention it once in her statement on the courthouse steps. She had written the statement herself, at her kitchen table, on the same Wednesday evening after the verdict came in. She had made tea she did not drink, and sat in the quiet of the house she had almost lost the right to walk into freely. And she had written and crossed out and rewritten until what remained on the page was exactly what she meant, and nothing that she did not. She delivered it the following morning on the courthouse steps, in the same navy blazer she had been wearing the day Blake Turner put her in handcuffs on her own street. That was not an accident. Stephanie Cole did not do things by accident. She said this. She said, 11 years ago, I took an oath to protect the civil rights of people who could not protect them for themselves. I believed in that work then, and I believe in it now. But I want to be honest about something that this case forced me to confront. I spent 11 years fighting for other people while quietly absorbing what it cost me personally to move through the same systems I was investigating. I told myself that was professionalism. I understand now that it was also fear. The fear that if I demanded for myself what I demanded for others, I would not be believed. That the badge would not be enough. That nothing would be enough. She paused. She said, I was right that the badge was not enough. Blake Turner looked at my federal credentials for 2 seconds and put me in handcuffs anyway. But I was wrong about what that meant. It did not mean I had no power. It meant I had a responsibility to use every bit of power I had, not just for the people whose cases crossed my desk, but for the man who was stopped shoveling snow in his driveway, for the woman carrying her own groceries outside her own apartment, for the teenager ordered off his bicycle on a public trail, for every person who faced exactly what I faced and had nothing in their pocket but their innocence and their dignity. She looked directly at the cameras. She said, I did not come here for the verdict. I came here for the record, because records outlast all of us, and the record now shows what happened, who allowed it, and what it cost. She folded the paper. She thanked Diana Reeves. She walked down the courthouse steps. She drove home to Elmwood Hills. She parked in her driveway. She walked 40 feet to her front door, up the 3 porch steps, key in the lock. She went inside, the way she always had, the way she always should have been able to. And somewhere in a filing cabinet in a federal courthouse, a record existed that made sure the next woman got to do the same. If this story moved you, do something with that feeling right now. Hit the like button, leave a comment, share this video with someone who needs to hear Stephanie Cole's name today. Because her story is not just about one woman and one street and one corrupt officer. It is about every single person who has ever been made to feel like a suspect in a place they belong. Every person who filed a complaint and watched it disappear. Every person who needed the system to hold and felt it give way instead. Stephanie Cole walked back into her house, but she made sure the door she opened was wider than the one she had walked through before. That is what fighting looks like when it is done right. Not just for yourself, for everyone coming after you. Subscribe if you are new here. We tell stories like this one every single week. Stories about ordinary people who faced extraordinary injustice and refused to be erased. Share this one, because the least we can do is make sure the world knows what happened on that sidewalk, and what happened when she refused to let it go.